Hi, I'm Megan. Welcome to today's live reading of Sleeping Love by Natalina Reis, presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Join me. Chapter 1, Shadows. Ye. There was a peace in the silence I didn't fully embrace. I had made it through the past year only to fall prey to the curse. In this sleep state, I can find some solace and be free of the guilt that riddles my heart and soul. I can fill my days and nights with memories of my love, safe, however unhappy, and the knowledge there is nothing I can do to save him now. Gods, I wish things were different. Ayo. He watched as the shadows approached, silent and anonymous under the secretive light of the moon. It slid across the surface of the still waters of the river like a thief in the night. Ayo wondered who it might be, a new resident or something else entirely. The arrival of new residents had stopped suddenly a few months ago. He remembered a time, shortly after his own arrival over a year ago, when the king and his body of royal guards had flooded the isle with new outcasts. Some had never made it to the banks of the Isle of Ubli, choosing to try their luck in the waters of the Movado River, only to find out that the beasts living there were every bit as ruthless as their king. Wouldn't death be a better outcome than life on the Isle? It was a question he had asked himself many times since. Like those men and women, he had come close to jumping overboard. But in the end, that tiny thread of hope and self preservation that still clung to his heart had won. Ayo followed the shadow's progression as it made its way, slowly and in sputters, to the bank and then onto land, heading toward the settlement that was so small and pitiful it couldn't even be called a village. A couple dozen huts had been built haphazardly, as far from the water as possible on the tiny island, a sad collection of decrepit buildings put together from sticks, mud, grasses, and whatever other materials were available at the time. When it rained, some of them went down with it, melting like the snowmen he had once seen in the mountains, and had to be rebuilt again. Not that it mattered, since most of the Isle inhabitants didn't have long to live anyway. Disease, the elements, or pure heartbreak regularly took their souls to the afterlife. Doggedly, Ayo remained healthy and thriving, at least physically. Inside, he was dead. His heart had shriveled to the size of a walnut, just big enough to continue pumping blood through his veins and keep him alive. With mild interest, Ayo crouched behind bushes and tracked the shadowy figure all the way to the middle of the settlement. Nothing ever happened on the Isle other than the routine disposal of the dead, which involved a gruesome feeding of the river beasts. Despite everything, he felt the teeth of curiosity gnawing at him. Who could who could that be, and why was the visitor on the Isle? When the shadow disappeared within the hut he claimed as his own, Ayo's dormant heart skipped a beat or two. Had the king sent an assassin to finish him off? But if so, why? He was not going anywhere, and the odds of him living long enough were strongly against him. His ruthless king wouldn't be so frivolous as to waste his money on a hired killer. There was only one way to find out who it was. If it was indeed a death emissary from the monarch, so much the better. Shortening his miserable life would be a welcome turn of events, even though his self-preservation instinct rebelled against it. Ayo emerged from his hiding place and ducked under the low doorway of the shelter to face the mystery visitor. Looking for me? It was darker inside than under the moonlight. His hut had no light or windows. When he had first arrived on the Isle, it had been the only shelter not taken, a square box made of metal sheeting and cardboard with a hole in the roof to allow heat to escape. The dark figure inside had collapsed in a corner with his back against the thin wall and legs stretched out in front of him. Ayo Mkuu? The man's ragged breath filled the silence of the night. Who wants to know? His initial fear had been replaced with curiosity. Whoever this was, he was obviously not in any condition to attack Ayo, much less kill him. And how did he know in which hut to find him? Are you a king's man? Another crackling of breath. I come from the prince. Ayo's heart stopped beating for a second. The prince? His prince? Prince Uzurri is in grave danger. Danger from who? The stranger had mentioned the one thing that would not only pique Ayo's curiosity, but also command his full attention and concern. Why would he be in danger with all those king's guards around him? The stranger coughed. The whole kingdom is in danger, fallen under a spell from the luck. He coughed again. I won't last long. Now, Ayo, I've been infected with the curse. Everyone has, even the prince. Ayo's breath caught in his throat. Curse? What was the stranger talking about? Who are you and what do you want from me? I am Jin, and I have come to ask you to save the prince, save the kingdom. Laughter bubbled out from Ayo's lips for the first time in months, bitter and biting. Me, save the kingdom? Did you notice where I live? I am prisoner here. You're the one who can save the prince now. I brought a boat. He was interrupted by another fit of coughing. You can take it. There are no guards. There was truth in his words. The Isle of Iblis didn't need any guarding. No one wanted in, and there was no way out. Despite the weirdness of the situation, Ayo's thoughts went to the prince, his childhood friend and constant companion as they grew up into teenagers and then men. How sick is he, Prince Uzurri? It won't be long before he falls into the coma, the man said, his voice labored and raw. Most of the kingdom has already fallen, even the king. Ayo snorted. That was one bit of good news, at least. He had no pity for the ruthless monarch, but the prince was a different matter. Maluk's monks have somehow cursed the whole kingdom. For what purpose? Ayo asked, his mind reeling with worry for his friend. What are they trying to achieve with something like that? The man shook his head and coughed again. No one knows. King Uzurri had sent some troops to attack one of Maluk's colonies a few months before that. So revenge could be the reason. Invading a kingdom where the whole population is in a deep coma did not make much sense, though, unless they had an antidote that they were planning to use after the land was well under their control. Shit. Well, they will kill the prince once they get a hold of that land. Jin nodded, panting, grabbing at his chest. Won't I get infected once I step onto the other side of the Modalvo River? No. A few people who had been out of the kingdom at the time of the curse have not contracted it after they've returned. The man's cough was getting alarmingly worse. Can you walk? Ayo asked, making a decision and kneeled beside him, ready to help him to the boat. No, leave me here. Go now. Ayo hesitated. For the past year or so, he had been numb, isolated from humanity in a place where there was no need for sympathy or kindness, but now a strange urge was taking over. He didn't like the idea of leaving a sick man on this island of death. No, you're coming with me. I will carry you. Easier said than done. The man next to him had the muscle and body bulk of a warrior, while Ayo's body had been slowly forgetting its former strength. He slid an arm under the man's armpits and the other under his knees and prepared to lift him. Surprisingly enough, it wasn't as hard to get on his feet with the heavy load as Ayo had thought. Apparently, all that logging and carrying rocks and wood for fires had kept his muscles in shape. With the last adjustment of his human cargo, he took off silently out of the hut and down the hill to where the boat was moored. I'm not sure what I can do to help Prince Uzurri. He was talking more to himself than the nearly unconscious man in his arms. They've bound my magic. The memory of the moment the Mushu Z had removed his magic and bound it in an object now kept under lock and key at the palace made him shiver. He wouldn't wish that kind of agony on anyone. As a warrior, he was used to pain, the many scars on his body vivid proof of that. But the removal of his magic core had been a pain of a totally different caliber. It was as if they had ripped him apart and yanked his insides out. The pain had lasted for weeks afterward, and it still lingered when he was exiled to the Isle. Where the core had been, there was now an empty space that screamed to be filled. The prince thinks he may be able to recover it, the man whispered, a labored pause between each word as if it hurt to talk. He believes he has figured out where his father hid your magic. Ayo flinched at the memory. The magic they had kept secret for so long, the one secret that had ultimately given the king justification to exile the man he considered a danger to his power. He shook his head, dispelling the memories. He and the prince had managed to keep it a secret for a few years, but as they grew into adulthood and their daily responsibilities burgeoned, for Ayo as a warrior and Yi as the crown prince, it was only a matter of time before it was discovered. Ayo was certain the king and his cronies had long suspected, but had no proof. Ayo's ever-growing magic was, or so the king thought, a great threat to the kingdom. The black boat was small, more of a dinghy than a real boat. There was barely enough space for the two of them, but it did have the advantage of being nearly invisible at night. There aren't any oars, Ayo said as he deposited Jen gently inside the boat and looked around for the sculls. How were they going to reach the other bank without them? Magic, the man stuttered, lifting a hand to point at the back of the vessel. Ayo followed the direction of the man's finger and was relieved to find a white ceramic bottle with the usual label that marked it as a container of magic, a single moon crescent crowned by a star. He uncorked it and quickly poured the contents over the small rudder at the boat's stern. After a few anxious moments, the boat began to rock gently and turn around. Take us to the Tiāntáng, he commanded. With a lurch, the dinghy began its trek, slowly cutting through the quiet waters of the Moldova River so silently that even the beasts that lived in those waters seemed to be oblivious to their presence. Ayo sat down next to the sick man and allowed himself a moment of rest. The air he inhaled was spoiled with the rotten smells of the river, a mixture of stale waters and the organic debris that floated in it, some so degraded that even the beasts wouldn't eat it. He stared up at the full moon and the stars, and for the first time that night, he wondered about what was happening. Just a couple hours before, he had been focused on finding food and clean water to stay alive a bit longer, and now he was on his way to the kingdom of the Tiāntáng, which was ruled by the same king who had condemned him to a lifetime of misery. He didn't care what happened to the kingdom and all the people who had vilified and damned him, but he couldn't let the prince wither away into a coma he would most likely never awake from. Prince Uzurri was his friend, and just as much of a pawn in the hands of his royal father as Ayo was. They had a strong bond, one Ayo had vowed to always uphold as the prince's sworn brother and his friend. He was not going to stand by and let Yi die, not without a fight, even if it meant death for himself. After all, without his magic, he was dead anyway.